Welcome everyone to today's Rural Roundtable Peer Learning event, one in a series of peer learning opportunities for grantees of the Rural Violent Crime Reduction Initiative. My name is John Connolly, Senior Program Officer with the LISC Safety and Justice team, one of the two training and technical assistance partners for this project. I am joined also today by Samantha Reinerson, Program Manager with the National Policing Institute, our fellow TTA provider for this program. Also want to recognize Juliana Palmer, Policy Advisor with the Bureau of Justice Assistance, the program funder. Juliana may be able to join us a bit later in today's event. I think we have a really fantastic agenda for you today, which I'm going to review in just a moment, but want to go through just a few housekeeping and logistical items first. So next slide, please. Quick disclaimer and acknowledgement that although this project is supported by the Bureau of Justice Assistance, the opinions and conclusions are solely those of the presenters today and do not necessarily reflect the opinions or positions of the United States Department of Justice. Next slide, please. So just a few event logistics. You may have noted that the event is being recorded and will be made available to you as an online resource shortly after the conclusion of today's event. We will also be providing a link to an event survey. I'll be putting that in the chat a bit later in the event, as well as in an email follow-up to the cohort of grantees. Also want to recognize that we really encourage question and answers from today's attendees and grantees. We want to make sure that this event is a resource to you and encourage folks that have the opportunity, if you'd like to keep your camera on and ask questions utilizing the chat feature, happy to do that, or feel free to use the raise hand feature and we can call on individuals to ask questions of both the guest presenter and the site presenters. So those are our event logistics. We'll move on to the agenda. Next slide, please. So I think we have a really great presentation today around the topic of crime data gathering and analysis, which of course is a key component of work being conducted by grantees, whether you're at the start of your efforts or you're midstream. As you'll hear in a bit, we really focus in on crime data gathering analysis as a circular effort, not a linear one. And so we want to make sure that today's presentation has the opportunity to provide you with some best practices and resources. After that guest presentation, we'll hear from two grantee presenters. First, we'll hear from our friends at the United New York Police Department, followed by our friends at the Ridge Springs, South Carolina Police Department. Have the opportunity to ask questions after both of those presentations, along with a bit of open discussion and facilitated Q&A if time permits. And then finally, we'll have just a few announcements to wrap up. So with that said, next slide, please. Happy to introduce our guest speaker today, Carrie Urico, who is a Senior Program Manager at the National Policing Institute. Carrie currently manages the Training and Technical Assistance for the Local Law Enforcement Crime Gun Intelligence Center Integration Initiative, which is administered by the Bureau of Justice Assistance in partnership with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. Carrie also works on this project, the Rural Violent Crime Reduction Initiative, supported by BJA, delivering training and technical assistance to rural agencies. And lastly, Carrie has over 17 years of public safety and analytical experience working in multiple jurisdictions before beginning her tenure with the National Policing Institute in 2018. In short, we're super excited to have Carrie join us today and provide a presentation on data-driven strategies to address violent crime. With that, Carrie, I'm happy to turn it over to you.
All right, thank you so much, John. Nice to meet all of you. So as John mentioned, I'm going to kind of tailor this a little bit to my previous life as a crime analyst, and I was the director of Camden County Police Department's analytical unit, as well as Baltimore Police Department's intelligence unit prior to joining the Policing Institute, but I started my career as a crime analyst in Washington, D.C. And while those are obviously larger jurisdictions, I think there's some really important, lessons learned that I had that could really be applicable to you all in some of, the agencies that you work with. So please feel free to ask any questions. as I go through, and we'll have time at the end as well. But I'm just going to kind of talk through some of the examples that kind of worked for us. So to kind of think about this as a data-driven policing model. So I'm sure most of you through this funding have been incorporating kind of this problem-solving aspect, right? So kind of following the SARA model. So thinking about how we can address this to, decrease violent crime and overall disorder in your agencies and jurisdictions. Starting off in the scanning environment, identifying those neighborhood crime and disorder problems, analysis, leveraging the data to understand why these problems are occurring in your jurisdictions, response, develop and implement solutions to improve public safety in your communities, and then the assessment. So looking at the overall impact. Many of you are probably familiar with the wide variety of data that's out there, particularly what you're probably gathering in your jurisdictions through computer-aided dispatch and records management systems. But I think kind of coming from the analytical world, there are so many other data sets and types that are really, really helpful when you're trying to address some of these problems in your jurisdictions. So two in particular that I wanted to highlight today, and I'll talk a little bit more about later on, are field stops or field contacts and vehicle stops, as well as automated license plate reader data. So I think if your agency kind of collects some of this data and you're able to overlay it and look at it in relation to that CAD RMS, it provides a variety of intelligence and really gives you an idea of where your problem locations are and potentially even kind of the problem people in your jurisdictions. So I encourage you, if you do have access to something similar like that, to start thinking about how you might incorporate that into your analysis. And also the public information and kind of 311 data to give you an idea of some of those general disorderly and, kind of TED related crime, areas. So I'm going to talk kind of high level about three types of analysis that I think are really important to think about as we think about crime analysis in general. So thinking kind of on the big picture in terms of strategic crime analysis. So if you're thinking about kind of these long-term planning and accountability measures, what does your department really want to do? What's the overall goal and objective in terms of decreasing the criminal element in your jurisdiction? Thinking about ways that you could potentially benchmark with other agencies of similar size. So thinking maybe even within your state, there's another agency that's somewhere nearby, just meeting up, talking with them about some of the ways that they're looking at their data is extremely helpful. Looking at geographic information systems to help you analyze hotspots of criminal activity, really looking at those patterns and trends over time, and then creating some standardized statistics that you'll report on and track to support perhaps like a ComStat or data-driven type meeting. So tactical analysis is thinking a little bit more about the short-term operational deployment. So how can we use the resources that we have to really have the biggest impact? So target-based sort of crime locations based on that criminal activity and patterns. This is a lot of times used in something like a real-time crime center or a fusion center, where these analysts can sometimes provide real-time information to help, understand and help deploy patrol. So thinking about other technologies that you might be able to help with your tactical crime analysis, if you have access to CCTV cameras or anything like that to kind of help that resource allocation in the field. And then criminal intelligence analysis, I'm sorry. This is more of kind of the supporting that investigative and patrol, and it could be sometimes patrol related, but how to improve those investigative outcomes. So thinking about, especially if you have gun violence in your jurisdiction, or even, shots fired or some sort of disorderly aggravated assaults that are occurring, thinking about how can we potentially aid the detective component to, perhaps solve these crimes? This can deal a lot with social media monitoring, any intelligence you're able to glean through that. I've worked in jurisdictions as well where we've really dug into kind of overdose trends in relation to drug activity and narcotics activity and provided that information. So there's kind of a wealth of knowledge and that, an analyst could provide if there are access to, more of these intel-based areas, even ballistic linkage. So, obviously some of your jurisdictions probably don't have a ton of gun violence, but this is a really important area of intelligence where if you do even have, a shots fired and that patrol officer is able to collect that ballistic evidence, they are able to submit into a larger kind of regional network called the National Integrated Ballistics Information Network, and you could potentially link ballistic activity across different jurisdictions. So that's just another way, again, to maybe strengthen some of those collaborative partnerships within your state. So I'm going to talk a little bit and show a couple of examples that really worked well. And the first two are maps of Camden. Now, Camden obviously is a little bit bigger. I think they had about 300 sworn officers, but coming from Washington, D.C. and then Baltimore, for me, Camden was a lot smaller, but still with some big crime problems. But something that was really effective that we did there was looking at violent crime indicator calls for service. So calls for service that are kind of clustering in a pattern to perhaps be indicative of a future act of violence, or if you're getting a repeated calls for service for fights or criminal mischief, something that could potentially lead to an aggravated assault or a robbery down the road. Really kind of honing in on these trends. And again, you're able to maybe reallocate your patrol to support these efforts. So this was something that, we had our analysts constantly looking at and monitoring and kind of communicating this information. So you'll see here, we had a few areas of vice complaints that we always, or few types of vice complaints that we always looked at. So gambling, prostitution, and narcotics, and the purple dots were the narcotics. And we would hone in on kind of these locations and really try to make sure that our patrol was responding and, being out there and proactive so that that did not lead to an actual violent incident. Here's also where you can leverage some of that automated license plate reader data if you are collecting that, and using the data from there to overlay and perhaps map out, looking at those vehicles that have been frequently stopped in the area. So again, tying together additional data sets and maybe expanding beyond a little bit from the CAD RMS. So I mentioned that proactive activity. So we also were able to track where our officers were responding during their downtime, right? So if your officers are not responding to a calls for service, what are they doing? Are they being proactive? Are they engaging with community members? Are they conducting business checks? Are they just kind of participating in foot patrols? So we had a way to, track that through what we called in Camden a directed patrol, where they would essentially put themselves out on doing some sort of community engagement activity. So that's what we would map out here. And as you notice, kind of those red areas are the time that they were spending in those jurisdictions. So that was sort of their hotspot, like their foot patrols that they were frequenting. But then we would look at where our crimes were actually occurring, and we would notice they were offline, right? So that one large sort of red area that you see was kind of Camden's main business area, which was great, but there wasn't a lot of crime there, or at least a lot of violent crime, and the crimes that, they placed a little bit more prioritization on. So we just needed to shift some of this deployment. So if you have a way to, track that either through an officer GPS, radios, body cameras, if they're calling themselves out on specific calls, this was something that, the sworn members found extremely helpful, particularly in resource allocation. And then again, focusing on kind of these offenders. So leveraging that field contact and motor vehicle stop data. So you'll see, like, we ended up seeing a lot of people who were frequently stopped together. Who are the officers contacting, where, what vehicle are they associated with? Again, using some of those other data sets such as ALPR to try and connect the dots together. And then when are they being contacted? So looking at time of day of week, and making sure that you can kind of allocate resources accordingly. So implementing a crime analysis program if you don't have one. I like to talk about this a lot because specifically some of the agencies that I work with now are a little bit larger, but we do have some on a smaller side. And I really find that implementing some element of crime analysis will give you a bang for your buck, right? So every agency that we speak with now, at least on some of my other projects, and I know here, are strapped for resources. So thinking about ways that you can free up person power and really have officers responding to calls or investigating crimes, I think is really important. So finding the right fit, whether it's going to be a civilian or a sworn member, has kind of positives and negatives both ways, I guess you could say. So if a civilian is coming straight from college, they have that academic training, they're data driven, they're skilled in new technologies. I'll be the first to admit I've been out of the actual analytical game for over 5 years now, and things have changed so much. I mean, I look at some of the work that analysts are doing now, and it's way beyond where I was 5 years ago. So somebody who's sort of has this analytical mindset and is, up to speed with some of the new technologies that are out there. But then on this flip side, if you have a sworn member that you would like to even serve in this capacity as like a part-time or full-time, they have that academy training, they're policy driven, they're skilled in kind of the street intelligence, patrol, and investigative mindset. Perhaps sometimes it's kind of marrying the two together on a part-time basis. Maybe you're able to get a civilian intern, but they are working closely with a sworn member. That was sort of like in Baltimore, we had a combination of two, and it really worked well. So I think for your particular departments, kind of think about that. What might be the right fit and in implementing an analytical program? If you do reach outside of your department to hire an analyst, there's a lot of resources out there for you all. I would suggest reaching out to local universities. Again, there's lots of interns that are interested in this work. There's online resources, International Association of Crime Analysts, International Association of Law Enforcement Intelligence Analysts. They have a lot of free resources on their websites. You can post positions on there. And again, even for kind of more rural jurisdictions, I see postings all the time on there. So I encourage you to kind of explore some of those options. And if you are hiring an analyst, think about creating both scenario-based and sort of personality-based interview questions. How does this person think that they can make an impact on public safety? How are they critically thinking about some of these issues? You want to expand beyond the basic interview questions that we're all familiar with, because you do want the right fit for your department. I would suggest, a diverse interview panel. So if you work closely with a community group, maybe invite somebody in to sit in on the panel, not just have it be from your sworn members. If you work closely with the mayor's office or something, maybe invite somebody in, because essentially this person is serving your community and you want them to be comfortable and thinking about who is, analyzing this data and potentially having an impact on public safety. And then something that I always preach, the sustainability of an analytical unit or a crime analyst itself. This position, I think once an agency has it and did not have it prior, they never want to go without it again, because they see the benefit, they see how it could really help in terms of, freeing up person power. People are able to do real police work, as they say. So thinking about providing that analyst proper training, giving them potential growth opportunities, whatever it may be. If you are able to establish down the line an actual unit of more than one person, think about a manager to supervise that person. How will they get requests? Or, do they come, is it a request driven kind of model, or are they just kind of doing ad hoc work type of thing? And then really finding sworn members who embrace data-driven products, getting that feedback and making sure that what the analyst is producing is actually relevant to the department and helpful, because that's the last thing an analyst wants to do, is just churn out products and not have them be useful to the field. And then finally, kind of ingrain all of this into your policy and process. So reference that analytical unit, and making sure that once people leave due to attrition or promotion or retirements, that person and that kind of process is already in place for someone new to replace. So kind of just summarizing some recommendations for implementing data analytics in general. If you are able to invest in a robust RMS or a data warehouse, it will save your analysts loads of time for them to actually do analytical work versus cleaning dirty data, so that way data kind of talks to each other. So thinking about that, even if it's an Excel sheet, but it's like a clean Excel sheet, I think that just saves an analyst a lot of time. So however, if you are able to invest in an RMS that is really helpful and suitable for your department, or use something that is potentially provided by your state or a regional agency, I'd recommend going that route. Trusting technology. So once you have these sort of standardized reports and statistics and successes, I think the way that you're able to communicate that will build trust within your community. So you can have that analyst produce these sort of routine reports and show an impact of a program or an initiative that your department did, and it goes volumes to kind of increase that community trust, and then also to show someone like a mayor's office or a city council how valuable this position is. And then civilian crime analysts, sort of capitalizing again on that relationship between the sworn and civilian members, because I think setting up routine meetings and making sure that if you do have a civilian analyst in that function, making sure they're exposed to a sworn member, take them out on a ride along, have them provide regular feedback, and so they're able to tweak products that are really helpful for your individual organization. And then finally, we just kind of compiled some of the resources. So these are a few things that we have listed from the project that John mentioned that I work on. So improving kind of investigative outcomes in general. So Center for Improving Investigations. And all of these are linked in here, but it's a list of analytic tools. A lot of these are free. Some are, obviously ArcGIS and I2 Analyst Notebook can be very expensive, but something like QGIS or Google Earth Pro, they are free. And, we tried to kind of combine a variety of tools for the analyst to reference. A list of trainings for crime analysts. So again, some of these are free. You'll see on there in Excel, like that is the most valuable. I always had all of my analysts take this training because you're going to be working the most in Excel. And there are so many shortcuts and tricks and tips that are just, it will save an analyst a lot of time. And then finally, data management techniques. So again, those Excel shortcuts, again, to save time, and then just some overall techniques that, an analyst could potentially model and review. So that kind of sums up mine, if you have questions.
Thank you so much, Carrie. Really appreciate that fantastic presentation with a lot of good resources. So I don't see any questions in the comments section yet, but I just want to pause in case folks want to come off mute or quickly throw in a question in the chat for Carrie. And thank you again for that presentation.
Hey, Carrie, we just purchased a system called Citizen Connect. It's the public safety data analytics system. And we're just learning, how to use it and, seeing the various ways that we can filter information. We have Mendocino County has a very large, miles. We have miles. We're very rural. And so it's really helpful for that. And we presented it to our board recently and they loved it. And the public also has access to it. And people are really loving it so far. So thank you. I'm going to take some of the information from your presentation back to our command staff. We don't have an analyst that does that stuff right now. It's our sworn staff. But you know, it's something, definitely something that we would consider doing.
Yeah, and Juanita, you bring up a great point. I mean, once you do have some of this information and you're able to display it in a public facing manner, I mean, I think that just, again, builds trust within your community and, you know, speaks volumes of kind of where the department wants to go to. So that's fantastic. I mean, it sounds like it's, you know, your citizens are really, you know, loving it and appreciating kind of what you are able to produce on a public facing dashboard side.
We're really thankful for the grant allowing us to purchase this software too.
Great.
Really appreciate you volunteering there, Juanita. And just one follow-up question, has there been any impact yet that you've seen in the new software system and how it's helping you think through how you deploy to the two hotspots that you have identified for your project, or help inform kind of activities of the deputy in residence program, or any other kind of strategy shifts, or thinking through how you might shift those strategies based on the data you're beginning to collect?
Not yet. You know, it's so new. We just implemented it recently. But it is interesting to actually see it on the map. Like, you know, it's really helpful just to be able to see, you know, the spots, the hot spots, just pop up, and you can just see like calls for service, arrests, incidents. You can sort it by all that stuff, so you can see, you know, where I really liked the map that you had with the overdose information and stuff like that. I mean, that is just incredibly helpful. And without that technology, you know, you're piecing together information. I mean, the guys our people kind of know where things happen, but to actually see it on a map is really helpful.
Appreciate that, Juanita. Thank you so much. Any final questions for Carrie before we move along in our agenda? Hearing none and seeing none, let's move forward with the agenda, and just join me again in thanking Carrie for that fantastic presentation. And we will be making a copy of the deck available along with the recording of the of today's event. So you'll have that as an additional resource. Thanks so much, Carrie. We'll go to the next slide, please. So we're moving forward in our agenda today. We're going to hear again from two sites that are grantees under the Rural Violent Crime Reduction Initiative. You'll see the prompts of those questions on the slide before you. I'll also put those questions in the chat here just in a minute to help guide the discussion. But first up are our friends from the Oneida, New York site. And we're really pleased to have with us today Oneida PD's chief, Stephen Lowell. And I just want to make a quick note that when we began working together on this project, Chief Lowell was the assistant chief of the police department. So join me in congratulating the chief in a well-deserved promotion. And I will turn it over to you, Chief. The floor is yours.
Thanks, John. I appreciate it. And I just want to confirm everybody can hear me okay. I've been having some IT issues.
We can hear you fine, Chief.
Outstanding. Thank you. So we applied for the grant in 2021 after we saw an increase of violent crimes, assaults during that time of COVID in 2020 and 2019. And so the feedback from Patrol was, well, we really know there are some issues, and as happenstance occurred, we saw the solicitation come through from the DOJ, which prompted us in applying for it. As I applied for the grant, I wanted to do a real targeted deployment effort based on hotspot patrolling. Our agency is 22 square miles. We have a full-time sworn staff of 28 cops. We have 3 support staff that work in the front office, one of which, Melissa Luck, is one of our support staff who's on the call also, who's helped in this project by tabulating the data. She has an extensive knowledge in Microsoft Excel, which has been absolutely helpful. So we said, yeah, we can be friends with Melissa because you know Excel really well. And so that was, our community has about 10,500 residents on average, and we handle about 8,000 reportable incidents per year. That doesn't include traffic stops or follow-ups or anything like that. This project focuses on a relationship between our crime analysis center. New York State has regional crime analysis centers that are funded by the state, and we have a crime analyst assigned to our county. The city of Oneida is the biggest city and busiest city within Madison County. We are located 25 miles east of the city of Syracuse and 25 miles west of the city of Utica. So we're right in the middle between 2 essentially hub cities for drugs, major crimes, shootings, things like that. And as you might have it, I'm sure you all have it, where stuff absolutely trickles into our area. We have 2 corridors, the I-90 corridor that runs through the city, as well as State Route 5, which runs the length of the city and is a secondary road. So having said that, our work is focusing around, like I said, the Crime Analysis Center, looking at 5 years of data that we used an Excel sheet provided to us by our crime analyst, and we had to manually input data. And Carrie, one of the stumbling blocks for us was dirty data, where we had issues. So in developing a hotspot or heat map, we ran into issues with having to get rid of data. So for example, instead of somebody putting that the criminal possession of a weapon offense occurred on the 100 block of Main Street, they just wrote Main Street because it was a traffic stop. And so because Main Street, for example, might cover 17 city blocks, we couldn't map that data. So it had to be discarded. So the first crime analysis map covered data from 2017 through 2020, and we looked at 5 major categories based on UCR rankings, which were assault, burglary, criminal possession of a weapon, and robbery. And based on those, they provided us a heat map. We identified days of the week and times of day when those were occurring so that we could deploy personnel appropriately. That was the first data map. And then we said, well, gee, what are the secondary or contributing factors? So we went back and looked at drug offenses, domestic violence, and overlaid that data to pare down our hotspot areas to be manageable. So that was all of which took us essentially a year to get off the ground as we started on the project. We also sent people to a course called Crime Prevention Through Environmental Design, where we sent 2 of our people. We sent folks, the city sent folks from Parks and Rec, the Fire Marshal's Office, Codes Enforcement, to have a holistic approach to these hotspot areas, knowing full well that it's not just a law enforcement problem. We also developed a relationship in the spring of this year with Syracuse University and looking at how the city of Oneida interacts with the public. So we worked with the School of Newhouse to do public relations research, particularly with our police department, to say, how do we interact with our public and how does the public view the police department, just as a research project. They came back with some really good tips, and moving forward in the fall semester of this year, we are going to engage with them again with a separate class to have them develop a communications campaign. So they're going to come up with ideas and strategies to help us actually implement what was recommended through the research. And lastly, I had attended a 10-week evidence-based policing course put on by George Mason University, which helped in the data analytics regarding this whole project and the management of our hotspot policing. But successes are that we finally, in year 2, have been able to roll out deployments based on the hotspot strategies. The feedback has been tremendous. During each deployment, officers are required to complete a RVCRI activity report And it's essentially a tabulation of proactive contacts, juvenile contacts, how many group dispersals, did they attend a community meeting, did they have any business contacts, and then what other offenses, did we make any arrests while they were out and about? And then really we wanted a free-form text box. So the other component of this is that each officer, prior to going out on these details, is required to keep a very view 4 short videos regarding CPTED. So essentially we're priming the brain to bring back suggestions of what crime prevention measures are they seeing in this area, so that they can prompt a discussion when they have community contacts to bring back what the public is seeing. Again, recognizing that the data, if we're using call data or CAD data, only tells us what's been reported. In other words, it's a reactionary approach. We're only responding to what people are calling the cops for. But we need to recognize and get the feedback of maybe it's something we're not seeing that is particularly important in our crime prevention efforts. And then what's the feedback overall? Is our deployment in line with what the community expects us to be doing in these particular areas? And so far the feedback's been really great. And we're about 2 months into it, so more to come. Sustainability, we applied for the funding this recent RVCRI, the next round, and in hopes of purchasing some increased technology to help us tabulate data, something that we can overlay onto our record management system. We currently use Spillman, but there's got to be a better way to capture data, call data, that's less labor intensive for Melissa to have to go back and then input into an Excel sheet. There has to be a better way in year 2023. So other than that, we're going to continue with the deployments, the personnel deployments, and then we looked at cameras and also environmental enhancements being funded through the program as they're identified by citizens. We have a good working relationship with our Crime Analysis Center, and they've been just absolutely phenomenal. So that was a huge success in formulating that partnership with them. And I can't say enough good things about the work that they do with and for us. Any questions?
Thanks so much, Chief. Really appreciate that informative overview of your project's efforts. And I think the ability to use the data to deploy the officers, but also the ability to partner with other city departments and really look at the built environment has really enhanced your project's efficacy thus far. So kudos there, and happy to pause. I don't see any questions in the chat, but again, also welcome folks to come off of mute and pose any questions to your fellow grantee there in Oneida, New York.
I think the best thing that I can summarize is that going to the evidence-based policing course and reaching out to our Crime Analysis Center. I just went to a Chiefs conference and they talked about evidence-based policing strategies, and we had people from the city of Buffalo with 1,000 cops and the city of Newburgh with 500 cops. And really, so our agency is 28 sworn, and it takes time and a little work, but it can be done even at a smaller agency to work with your analytics. It can be done at a small agency. It's just trying to shape how best you want to structure your program, I guess.
Looks like we do have one question, Chief, from Kathleen Weber. She's in the Kewanee, Illinois site. Can you mention what environmental enhancements that have been identified or suggested? So
far, lighting, and we had a park that was originally identified in one of the hot spots, and the DPW has already trimmed up trees to provide clear lines of sight. They also have suggested putting a signage of when it's a city park. So when the park closes, any park rules. And the most surprising thing to me was bike racks and garbage cans in 2 of our hotspots. The community has come back and said they're tired of the garbage in the area, and they suggested garbage cans on more than one occasion. And we're like, well, gee whiz, that makes sense. And then bike racks. People feel that the bikes being left against buildings or left against light poles or mailboxes or whatever in the downtown area within the city are unsightly, and that's leading to a detraction from there. So we're looking to purchase bike racks, lights, and garbage cans so far. We have a meeting next week to figure out how DPW wants to handle all of that, because they're going to be responsible for that stuff. And so that's why we're engaging them, because we're identifying it. But if it's something they don't see that they could maintain or they want to install or maintenance, we're kind of essentially beat at that point.
Appreciate it, Chief. Hopefully that helps answer your question, Kathleen. I don't see any further questions in the chat. So just want to thank you again, Chief, and we'll move to our second site presentation. And of course, we can have additional questions for the Chief at the end of the presentation. But want to take the opportunity now to introduce our friends from Ridge Springs, South Carolina. That's Captain Scott Wary and crime analyst Robert Stedman. So Captain, happy to turn it over to you, and you'll see the prompts in the chat. Same overview of your site and project and activities similar to the Chief's presentation. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, John. My name is Captain Scott Weir. I'm with the Ridge Spring Police Department. Also on the call, you should be able to see Robert Stedman. He is our civilian crime analyst. I started my law enforcement career in 2004. My entire career has been with rural agencies, which I've learned present a unique set of challenges. Those challenges require that good law enforcement develop and hone a wide range of skill sets. Rural does not equal Mayberry. Quite the contrary. We see all the crime that larger jurisdictions experience. We just experience them on a more intermittent basis. Not having this constant crime can lead to us losing our skills that we develop in training if we don't find ways to continue to hone them. It's important that rural communities receive the quality law enforcement that residents and businesses need to feel safe. In order to provide that, we can't have small-minded thinking just because we're a small agency. That is why here at Ridge Spring, we strive to set an example. The town of Ridge Spring is located in Saluda County, South Carolina. It's primarily a rural agriculture county. We're unique in that we're located near the convergence of 4 counties, Saluda, Aiken, Edgefield, and Lexington, just off of I-20 that runs between Augusta, Georgia, and Columbia, South Carolina. Being in this location puts us at the convergence of 2 of the HITA areas, the Columbia, South Carolina metro area, which we fall in, and it borders the Atlanta HITA area. With approximately 700 permanent residents, we are constantly finding ourselves understaffed and overworked, especially in the summertime when this number triples due to the migrant workers we get for farming. We only cover about 2 square miles, and of those 700 residents, about a quarter of that population sits below the poverty line. Prior to September 2018, our agency consisted of 1 full-time officer, that was the chief, and 3 part-time officers. With the help of the RVCRI grant, we now sit at 3 full-time officers, 2 part-time officers, and 1 part-time civilian crime analyst. Besides obtaining the RVCRI grant, we established a drone program, helping to launch the South Carolina Public Safety Drone Pilots Association. We've also placed approximately 55 video cameras through town, and I'll say, Chief Lowell, if you can get on with video cameras like the LISC system we use, these have been instrumental in solving violent crimes in our area, not just for us, but our neighboring agencies as well. We maintain an active partnership with those surrounding agencies, allowing us to work together for both patrol and investigative purposes, which has proven very useful in reducing violent crime as well as solving those crimes. We partner with a local nonprofit to provide food to those in need on a regular basis. We also attend the local business association meetings in an effort to provide effective crime prevention strategy for the businesses. These relationships provide us inroads to the community information network when crime does occur. Something that is very important to us is that as a small agency, we set a standard that shows other agencies of similar size that being small does not mean having small-minded thinking. We constantly train, update our policies, and look for ways to innovate and keep up with modern trends and issues. We work with community members and businesses to obtain equipment and training that is outside of our budgetary limits, as well as constantly looking for free training. In order to make this happen, it requires buy-in to the mindset from every member of our agency. The reason we applied for the RVCRI funding is that leading up to the application, we observed that a lot of our violent crime was occurring when no law enforcement was on duty for the town of Ridge Spring. At that time, the chief of police, Chief Grenier, was full-time during the day. Myself, I was switching from part-time to full-time at night. And we were seeing that based on evidence such as reports being taken, being able to track the movements on those cameras we had through town, and being called in on our days off, that crime was literally occurring, violent crime was literally occurring when neither one of us were on duty. We would watch vehicles tracking them by those cameras drive past my house, who I live in town, and Chief Grenier's house, who also lives in town. And then 20 or 30 minutes later, we would have the stabbing or the shooting or the robbery. And it was the same vehicles and same people we saw drive by these cameras after checking out to see whether or not we were working. So we believe, based on what we were observing, that if we could develop a more consistent presence, we could hopefully start to curb some of that violent crime. We also knew that if we were going to show council and grant managers where we started before the grant, where we are at during the grant, and where we end at the end of this grant period, we were going to need a way to present statistical data. We felt that the RVCRI grant would allow us to accomplish these goals by getting that third full-time officer and our civilian crime analyst, Robert Stedman. From 2016 to 2021, we had approximately 55 incidents of violent crime. This included 3 murders and 2 attempted murders. Now, for an agency of 300 or a larger town, that seems like really low numbers. But for our small community of 700, it was considerable. It was unacceptable. So in short, we applied to obtain the personnel we felt we needed to reduce those violent crime numbers. We got our grant, and in July of 2022, we hired our 2 employees that were provided by the grant. And we also purchased some of the equipment they would need to be productive. The officer was uncertified, so immediately we began the process of pre-certification and obtaining him an academy date. The crime analyst had a long history of public safety experience. He worked with our state law enforcement division, and so he was familiar with the scope of work that we needed done. The only work he would need to do was get familiar with our RMS system. We use a system here in South Carolina called LawTrack. The officer attended and graduated the academy, then proceeded with the field training. After he came off field training, we began a shift schedule that allowed us day coverage Monday through Friday, that was Chief Grenier, and 6 nights coverage, Sunday being the only night that was not covered. So myself and the new officer, Officer Silk, would work every night of the week except for Sunday night. 2 nights of the week we were working together, which allowed him to get some experience after the FTO program while having minimal supervision. Since the full-time officer has been off FTO, we've only had 2 reported incidents of violent crime. He came off of FTO April of 2023, I believe. So we're seeing that this increased presence has been successful so far. The crime analyst has started tracking monthly statistics on which he continues to expand. We've been able to present this information to our council and the RVCRI on a regular basis to show the work that we're doing and how it's helping the community. When we started this, I believe that our biggest challenge was going to be recruitment, as we are so far out, and you don't get a lot of people out this way who want to be in law enforcement. This almost rang true in that we only had 1 applicant for each position. However, both of our applicants were excellent candidates and have proven to be part of our success. We still struggle sometimes with providing nightly coverage. With only 2 of us, shifts have to be adjusted for training, court, sick days, things like that. So there are often times we don't have nightly coverage. Our crime data and statistical analysis has been a huge boon to our ability to articulate what trends we're seeing, though. One of the challenges we're facing that's been touched on a little bit is how to implement what we're seeing with that statistical data into real-time patrol adjustments. And hopefully after this session, this roundtable, we'll be able to work on that a little bit more going forward. Robert has been very successful in working with our RMS LawTracks in getting them to update or add features that would be helpful. We're blessed in that when Robert came on, they were in the middle of migrating from their current system to a cloud-based system. So all of these things that Robert's finding that could be improved upon or added, he's able to communicate that to them, and they're working on implementing it into their launch of their cloud-based system. By adding another officer, this allowed us to be more visible with more consistent coverage. We believe that this is a direct cause of the reduction that we've seen in violent crime. Our biggest challenge, I think, going forward will be the retention of this new officer. All the surrounding agencies have increased their pay considerably, and as a small town, we'll need to find a way to be competitive with that. As far as sustainability, we're going to continue to obtain training and skills and the tools necessary to allow us to be proactive and productive law enforcement. Our new officer has attended 90 hours of advanced training since his graduation from the academy in January 2023. We're going to work with the residents and businesses to foster good relations between ourselves and them. We're going to continue to build our presence via social media and community events. We believe that in order to maintain our success rate of lower violent crime numbers, we must continue to have a proactive police presence and to develop ways to deploy our statistical tracking in a meaningful way. Having just the statistics and doing nothing with them won't help us in any way at all. And as a department leader, I'm going to work with town leadership to find a way to remain competitive financially with the surrounding agencies so that at the end of the grant, we can retain this officer and give him the money he deserves. And then I'm happy to answer any questions.
Fantastic. Really appreciate that overview of the great work you're doing there, Captain. I will pause to see if there are any questions for the Ridge Springs site. I don't see any in the chat yet, but again, welcome folks if they'd like to come off a mute and ask questions of the captain about his work.
If you do have questions about the statistical data tracking, Robert is on the call and I'm sure he'd be happy to answer those questions as well.
Appreciate it, Captain. Thank you. Or Samantha, is there anything else you'd like to add from the Institute's perspective about the work in Ridge Spring?
Yeah, I'll hop in quickly. I'd just like to say, obviously the captain did a great job highlighting it, but it does show, right, an agency of 3, right, and three sworn members now, partially thanks to the grant, right, and bringing Robert in, who Robert has, Chief Lowell, you alluded to it, right, you started with some dirty data. Robert did a lot of work as well at the Ridge Spring site to clean data and get that in a presentable format and to make that statistically meaningful. But also, I'm not sure if the captain mentioned it explicitly, Robert has done this in a part-time capacity. He works 1 day a week and he's been able to make that much impact at the department in that role. And also very fortunate to work with an RMS vendor who is open to changes and suggestions from the department to make their systems more meaningful for the agencies that they're actually serving. So that's the only thing that I'll add there.
Really appreciate it, Samantha. Thank you. I don't see any further questions for the captain. I'll just say thank you again, sir, for taking the time and being willing to present on your project. And for the sake of time, we'll move forward with the agenda. We now have the opportunity to have, as the slide title indicates, an open discussion. If there are other questions or comments that come to mind, either on Carrie or the 2 site presentations, we're happy to entertain those. Or if you have other questions that you'd like to pose to LISC and the Institute as your TA provider or your fellow grantees, we have the opportunity now to have some open discussion. And while folks are thinking of those questions or comments, I'm going to put in the chat, as promised, the link to the survey for this event. We hope you found this event helpful, but we do really appreciate you taking the 2 to 3 minutes to complete that survey and send it back to us, as it really does help inform LISC and the Institute as we're thinking through structure, format, topics for future Rural Roundtable and other cohort-wide events and programming. So thank you for taking the time to quickly complete that survey. I'll pause and allow folks to jump in if they have questions or comments, or I may call on a site or 2. So I think I'd like to call on Crawford County, Wisconsin. James Hackett, I believe you're on the call. If you're able to unmute, I understand from our friends at the Institute that you're doing some really good work around using data to identify hotspots for your CIT officer and updating those maps quarterly. Wondering if you would like to spend just a moment talking about that work.
Yeah, it's been really good. We've identified our officer on 4 different what we've targeted as priorities, including violent crimes, people in crisis, narcotics, and then also 25% of community policing to help give back. And we're doing some of the Sarah model with hotspot policing on those hot maps, including some proactive, where those hot maps have showed some prediction of where we think it's moving, and it's really paid off. You'll see on our hot maps over the time where the problem was, we did not know where a lot of the problems were. And then it glows really hot because we're doing active enforcement there, and then it actually fizzles out. And we haven't seen them displace, which is kind of one of the things we thought we'd see, is it would be chasing it around, and we haven't. It's just kind of not displaced. It's left the area right now. So it's been a huge success story for us with that CIT officer that kind of has a rotating schedule. We use them on some nights, we use them on days, wherever the data says. And then with that, along with working with our investigator of knowing what is going on, we can kind of move the schedule, and it's really shown to be very effective in reducing our violent crimes and people in crisis. Also, we've seen a huge benefit having one guy deal with people in crisis because he gets the rapport, and we're seeing a reduction in repeat offenders, or I guess not offenders, but repeat people in crisis, because he keeps moving forward with them and being proactive. And I did misspeak. The other thing was sensitive crimes. He does a lot of our sensitive crimes because there is a direct correlation between narcotics, sensitive crimes, and people in crisis. So he does a lot of the ICAT crimes and sexual assaults as well.
Appreciate that, James. Thanks for the update there. And I think you bring in an important point, which is concern around displacement, right? That's a topic that I know I have a lot of conversations with departments around regarding that concern. And just a note, I'm sure the Institute has had these conversations with you as well, that although displacement is possible, what the research tells us is that more often than not, you'll actually see a diffusion of benefits, right? Which is areas you're really not focusing on, seeing some of that benefit of the work, and that displacement, at least spatially, very often does not occur. So kudos there. I see we have just 2 minutes left. So I will go to our last slide, please. So what's next? There is a webinar hosted by our friends at the Institute, Thursday, August 17th, focusing on sexual assault and intimate partner violence investigations. And I'll call on Samantha if you'd just like to tease that event for just a moment.
Yeah, absolutely. So as John mentioned, that'll be our next hosted webinar event. It will be at 2 p.m. Eastern time. You all have yet to receive registration information for that, but that will actually be coming out early next week. If you're interested in it, we do encourage you to attend. That particular event is also going to be open to the folks outside of the grant program. So if you have any surrounding agencies or neighbors to you that you know would be interested in that, when that information comes out, feel free to share that as well. John, I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks so much, Sam. Appreciate that. And the next roundtable, rural roundtable peer learning event is scheduled for Thursday, November 9th, 2 p.m. Eastern. Additional details to follow. And with that, unless we have 1 minute left, if there are any final questions or comments that folks have. I would just close then by saying thank you again to Carrie for her fantastic presentation, and to the Institute for partnering on this event, and also Chief Lowell and Captain. Appreciate your participation and presentation of your site discussions. With that, we stand adjourned, and thank you for your participation. Have the great rest of your day.